It was a typical family dinner, or so I thought. The smell of my roast chicken filled the house, a dish I had prepared with care, hoping it would bring everyone together. The evening started with the usual small talk, a bit of laughter, and my son Tom's half-hearted compliments. But then came the moment that changed everything. My daughter-in-law Vanessa looked me directly in the eye, put down her fork, and said, "Honestly, Sarah, how does anyone eat this? I don't know how Tom survived his childhood." The words sliced through the air, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. My mind raced, but for a moment I couldn't even move. How could she say something like that? The dinner table, once filled with the sounds of laughter and chatter, was now frozen. Richard, my husband of 35 years, didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from his plate. My son Tom shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. I could see the discomfort in his eyes, but there was no defense, no apology, not even a change in his expression. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was a thin, tight grin that couldn't mask the pain, the sting of humiliation that burned through me. I wanted to say something, anything to defend myself, but the words didn't come. Instead, I stood there, holding the roast I had spent hours preparing, as if somehow the meal could explain away the sharpness of her words. I tried to laugh it off. "Maybe I should have made takeout next time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa's response was quick, almost rehearsed. "Excellent idea. Then nobody has to pretend they enjoy your cooking." I stood there frozen, the weight of her words sinking in deeper than any criticism I had ever received. My own family, my own son, laughed it off. I was a stranger in my own home, invisible, as if everything I had done for them meant nothing. For 35 years, I had been the perfect wife, the devoted mother, the hostess who always made sure everyone was fed, happy, and taken care of. Yet, in that moment, I realized how little I had mattered. The years of sacrifices, the countless hours spent ensuring my family's comfort, the love I poured into every meal, all of it meant nothing. I had become nothing more than a backdrop to their lives. It was as if I had been erased, my value reduced to nothing more than what I could provide for them. The sadness I felt was overwhelming, but somewhere, deep inside me, something began to shift. That night, as I cleaned up the remnants of dinner, I stood in front of the kitchen window, looking at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My shoulders were hunched, my eyes hollow. I had given everything for my family, and yet here I was, standing alone, invisible in my own life. But then something inside me snapped. It was as if a long-forgotten part of me suddenly woke up. This would be the last time I allowed anyone to undermine me. No more. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you've given everything to others, only to be overlooked and taken for granted, I want you to know that you're not alone. Please hit that follow button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this, and comment below. I want to hear your story, where you're watching from, and how you've reclaimed your voice. Let's stand together. The next few days after the dinner were filled with a tension that lingered in the air like smoke. I couldn't shake the feeling of being suffocated by my own thoughts. Richard, as usual, didn't seem to think Vanessa's comment was a big deal. He brushed it off, dismissing it with a casual wave of his hand, as though it were nothing more than a harmless joke. "Vanessa didn't mean it like that," he said, as if his words could somehow erase the sting I felt. And Tom? Well, he stayed silent. I could sense his discomfort, but it was as if he had already made his choice. He wouldn't defend me. He couldn't. I had become the invisible woman in my own home, and somehow everyone around me had become accustomed to it. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but instead I found myself curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the television, as the house around me hummed with the usual routine. I was drowning in my own frustration, my own helplessness. For years, everything in my life had been about keeping everyone else happy. I had put their needs before mine, their happiness above my own. Every holiday dinner, every celebration, every family gathering, they were all meant to please them. I had given everything, but nobody seemed to care about me. My own happiness, my desires, my dreams were nothing but afterthoughts. I had been so focused on them, on making sure they were taken care of, that I had neglected to take care of myself. The days that followed were filled with a deep sadness I couldn't shake. It wasn't just about Vanessa's cruel words. It wasn't just about Tom's silence or Richard's indifference. It was about something much deeper, something I hadn't realized until that moment. I had lost myself in the process. My whole identity had become wrapped up in being the perfect wife, the dutiful mother, the accommodating daughter-in-law. But what had I gained from it? Nothing. No appreciation, no respect, not even the basic decency of being acknowledged as more than just a service to their needs. One evening, after yet another long, silent dinner, I walked into the kitchen, my hands trembling as I cleaned the table. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of footsteps from upstairs. As I looked out of the window, my reflection caught my eye. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow. It was like looking at a stranger. I had been so focused on everyone else, so busy trying to hold everything together, that I hadn't noticed the toll it was taking on me. The years of sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the countless little things I did to keep my family happy, they were invisible. It was as if all my efforts had been in vain, unnoticed and unappreciated. I had been the perfect wife, mother, and daughter-in-law, yet here I was, a shadow of the woman I once was. I realized in that moment that I had given up everything for them, my dreams, my independence, my voice, but I had nothing left of myself. I had become so entangled in their lives that I had lost sight of my own. The anger inside me bubbled up like a storm, raw and unfamiliar. How had I allowed this to happen? How had I let myself become so small, so invisible? I wasn't just angry with Vanessa or Tom or Richard, I was angry with myself. I had allowed them to take everything from me, and now there was nothing left. And that's when it hit me. I had to make a change. I couldn't live like this anymore. I had spent so many years making sure everyone else was happy, but in doing so, I had forgotten the most important person in my life, me. The very next day, Tom called me. It wasn't unusual for him to ask for money. He and Vanessa had done it countless times before. "Hey Mom, we need to buy a new couch," he said, his voice casual. "Can we borrow your credit card? We'll pay you back next month, just like we always do." The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. My first instinct was to say yes, to give in, just like I always did. But then something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I heard the voice inside me speak up. No more. I put the phone down for a moment, took a deep breath, and then said the words that had been buried for so long. "No, Tom, I won't lend you the money. I'm done." It wasn't just the words themselves that mattered. It was the power behind them, the strength in my voice. For the first time in decades, I felt in control of my life. I wasn't asking for permission or approval. I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate my worth. I was setting a boundary, and I wasn't going to let anyone cross it. The call ended quickly, and the silence that followed was thick with tension. I could hear Tom's surprise on the other end, but I didn't feel guilty. In fact, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, relief. But as the days passed, the reality of what I had done set in. I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa and Tom had been slowly pushing me into a corner for years. The passive-aggressive remarks, the constant undermining, the blatant disregard for my feelings, it was all part of a pattern that had been going on for far too long. And Richard, my husband, had done nothing to stop it. He had stood by and allowed me to be treated this way, never once defending me. His dismissiveness had become a part of the air I breathed, and I had allowed it. It was like the last 35 years of my life had been a lie. I had been a puppet in a family that didn't even know or care who I was. I had let them manipulate me, let them control me without even realizing it. But now, everything had changed. I wasn't going to sit by quietly anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life. It was time to fight for myself. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I knew that standing up for myself would come with consequences. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally living on my own terms. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was time for me to reclaim my life. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not Vanessa, not Tom, not even Richard, take that away from me. The time for self-sacrifice had ended. It was time to take back what was rightfully mine. 2 weeks after the dinner, I invited Tom over for his birthday, hoping that perhaps we could mend our fractured relationship. I spent days preparing a special dinner, his favorite meal, decorating the house, and even buying him a watch I knew he'd been wanting for months. I wanted him to feel loved, wanted to show him that despite everything, I was still his mother and still cared deeply about him. But as soon as Tom and Vanessa arrived, The tension in the air was undeniable. It felt thick, almost suffocating. I pushed it aside, determined to make the night pleasant. But then I overheard something that made my stomach drop. Vanessa was talking to her friend Alicia, unaware that I could hear her clearly from the kitchen. "She's so desperate for approval," Vanessa sneered. "It's easy to manipulate her." My heart stopped. I stood frozen, the sharp words piercing through me like a knife. I had spent so much of my life trying to keep everyone happy, giving and sacrificing without asking for anything in return. And here was Vanessa mocking me, laughing at my expense. The words felt like a slap in the face, and in that moment, I realized how invisible I had become. All my efforts, all my love, everything I had done for this family seemed meaningless. I managed to collect myself and kept serving dinner, trying to pretend everything was fine. But as the evening wore on, it became impossible to ignore the tension. And then came another comment. This time it was about the food, my food. "Honestly, Sarah, how does anyone eat this? It's awful." That was it, the final straw. I had taken enough of this cruelty. I set down my glass and looked at her, calm but firm. "If you don't like my food, maybe you should cook for yourself," I said. My voice was quieter than I wanted, but there was no mistaking the force behind it. Vanessa immediately escalated the situation. "Sarah, are you okay? You seem a little unhinged," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. Tom looked at me, embarrassed, and pulled me aside, his eyes darting nervously. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you acting like this?" But instead of supporting me, he sided with Vanessa. He seemed more concerned about keeping the peace than standing up for me, the woman who had raised him. That was when I realized that I had spent so many years, so many decades, living for everyone else, for Tom, for Richard, for Vanessa. I had been invisible in my own life, and I had allowed it. But not anymore. Not after tonight. I walked away from the dinner early, my heart heavy with sadness. When I got home, I went straight to the mirror, staring at the reflection of the woman I had become. I barely recognized her. But then, in the silence of that moment, something changed within me. I promised myself that I would never allow anyone, not Tom, not Vanessa, not even Richard, to treat me this way again. I had spent so long living for everyone else's happiness that I had forgotten my own. It was time to take back my life. And so, I made the decision. I would sell my downtown apartment, the one that had been in my name for years, the place Tom and Vanessa had lived in rent-free for far too long. It was my property, my choice, and it was time to reclaim my independence. I hired a lawyer and began the legal process. For the first time in my life, I was taking control of my future. This was no longer just about real estate. It was about my identity, my voice, and my freedom. The change had begun, and there was no going back. As I stood at the closing table, signing away the apartment, I realized something profound. The real victory wasn't the sale of the apartment or even watching Vanessa's life crumble. It was finding myself again. Reclaiming my power, my independence, and my dignity was the greatest revenge I could ever take. The apartment was just a symbol of everything I had given up over the years. My voice, my dreams, my self-worth. Selling it was my way of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It wasn't just about the property. It was about taking control of my life for the first time in decades. The sale brought me the financial freedom I had always longed for. With that freedom, I set out on a new journey. I traveled to Italy to reconnect with my love for art. I painted again, found new purpose, and realized that the hardest part of starting over is simply deciding to. I was finally living for me, and that was a gift I would never take for granted. To anyone who feels invisible, remember this: you have the power to change your life. Take the first step today. Live for yourself. Your happiness matters. Thank you for listening to my story. If you can relate, please like, share, and comment below. We're all in this together.